What would you do if, while rummaging through your grandfather's attic, you found a ring that slid onto your finger as if it had been waiting for you? Not because it was made for you, but because it was made from you. Tonight, our descent takes us deep into the hills of Appalachia, a place where mountains keep secrets longer than the people who live among them, and into the history of a single bloodline preserved by unnatural means, not to survive, but to repeat, to marry itself, to birth itself again and again until there was no one left but themselves. They say the Elbridge family disappeared. That's not true. They didn't vanish. They changed shape. Welcome back to Gothic Ledger, where we don't just tell forgotten stories. We open sealed rooms. We read pages that were never meant to be read, and sometimes we answer questions that should have stayed buried. If you're new here, leave your location and the time you're watching in the comments. I want to know where you are when the lights start flickering, and if you're brave enough to keep turning these pages with me. Like, subscribe, and help keep this archive breathing. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a map. It's a warning. And it's proof that some holes in the earth were never meant to be dug. It began in 1978 during what should have been a simple renovation of a weathered farmhouse just outside Stowe Hollow. The place had a bad reputation dressed up in polite explanations, 5 owners in 60 years, each one selling, for less than they'd paid each one, leaving without notice. On paper, the reasons were tame plumbing issues mold. In reality, no one filed complaints, no one argued with the sale. They simply left. A young couple from Ohio thought they'd break the cycle. They had plans to turn the place into a quaint bed and breakfast, bring life back to the hollow. It started with the kitchen. They pried up the old flagstone stones warped by decades of moisture and soft decay. And that's when they smelled it. Not rot, not mold. Something sweet, sickly sweet. The bones were barely buried, shallow, scattered, and unmistakably human. According to the sheriff's report, a copy I had to pry loose with the FOIA request, and even then it came back, looking like a crossword puzzle in black ink. The remains were fragmentary, brittle, discolored. At least 2 individuals, 1 adult, 1 child, possibly more. No official IDs were made, or at least none that were written down. The town doctor at the time, Harland Peck, was called to verify the scene. But a former deputy speaking to me only under condition of anonymity told me Peck stepped inside, looked once, and walked straight back out. He shuttered his practice a week later, retired early. And when I called him in Florida this year, the moment I said the word Elbridge, he hung up. The next to leave was Reverend Talcott. 40 years serving the same parish, a man who'd buried half the valley and baptized the other half. But when he came to the farmhouse, not for curiosity, but because of the graveyard behind it, he recognized the names. Every stone read Elbridge. 2 in particular stood out, Sarah and Abigail. Sarah, the spinster who lived alone in the Ridge House in the late 1800s. Abigail, listed as her daughter, had no birth certificate, no baptismal record, and according to official history, no descendants. Except, that's not entirely true. There is 1 birth certificate hidden away in a county office vault, misplaced under a stack of Civil War pension claims. I found it by accident while cross-referencing land records. Yellowed brittle, but still legible. Name Jacob Elbridge, born December 12, 1869. Mother Sarah Elbridge. Father unknown. The signature ink has oxidized into the color of dried blood. No witnesses. No marriage record. Only the name. And not long after the farmhouse Discovery Town records began to change quietly, surgically. The property's original blueprints, gone. Vanished from the assessor's office as if they'd never existed. The 1890 census records missing. Microfilm reels scratched, erased, unspooled. Like someone didn't just want to hide them, they wanted to make sure no one could ever piece them back together. And yet, Jacob's name remained. A single loose thread the fire forgot to burn. I still wonder, were those bones in the kitchen floor the end of the story, or the beginning, or worse? Were they nothing more than shed skin? The discarded shell of something still alive, still waiting, still watching from under the floorboards of a house that was never meant to be opened? Some women slip quietly out of history. Sarah Elbridge made sure her echo stayed. She was born in 1838, the daughter of a farming family clinging to a rocky parcel high on the Blue Ridge. The soil was too stony for corn, too shaded for wheat, but far enough from town that silence came easy. The earliest mention I could find was in a church ledger, water-damaged, half-legible. It notes that Sarah stopped attending service at 13 years old. No reason given, just her name, followed by a faded dash. From then on, the locals called her the strange girl of the ridge. Unmarried, unaccompanied. She came into town twice a month, always alone. Her dress never changed. Her shoes wore through at the toes, and her wicker basket was always filled with the same unsettling mix: a spool of red thread, white stones, a block of beeswax, and double rations of flour beans and salt. One portion for herself. The other people assumed was for a child no one had ever seen. No husband, no ring, no explanation, just the voice. She spoke softly, too softly, like someone imitating politeness without feeling it. Her cadence was off, almost lilting. One woman I interviewed said it was like hearing a girl talk to a doll. Her eyes didn't meet yours. They lingered, sliding through you like they were looking for something behind your face. Jacob Elbridge's birth was never announced. His lone surviving certificate, the one I found misfiled under Civil War pension claims, simply states, born December 12th, 1869. Mother Sarah Elbridge. Father unknown, no doctor, no midwife, just the ridge, the trees, and a girl who had quietly become a woman without anyone noticing. Then the voices began, not hers, theirs. Old-timers, descendants of the first families in the valley, told me the same thing. Sounds drifting through the hills at night. Not English, something older, heavier. One farmer said it was like two people reciting a poem in perfect unison, only one was always a half beat behind. Sometimes there was laughter high and breathy, followed by a second laugh in perfect mimicry. Same pitch, same tone, just not human. What disturbed people most wasn't the noise itself, but what it implied, because there had only ever been one voice in that house. Jacob was never seen, never brought to town, never enrolled in school, and yet Sarah's trips continued, and her basket was always full. A woman raising a child in isolation isn't unusual in frontier Appalachia. But what Sarah was doing wasn't parenting. It was preparation. A sculptor shaping wet clay. A mirror polished until it reflects not only the face, but the soul. She wasn't raising a son. She was raising a reflection. And if that reflection ever cracked, would it echo back, or would something step through? Some nights I wonder what would have happened if someone had gone up the ridge. But maybe someone did, and maybe that's why no one says their name anymore. Some boys grow in the shadow of their fathers. Jacob Elbridge grew in the reflection of his mother. By the time he turned 15, no one in town could say they'd seen him. Not clearly, not up close, and yet his presence lay over the valley like mist. Livestock vanished. Tools left out overnight were found rearranged by morning patterns etched into the soil beneath them. Perfect spirals, concentric circles, measured with unnatural precision. One farmer swore he saw a figure at the tree line tall, motionless, barefoot in the frost, skin pale as birch bark. They thought it was Sarah until it moved. Those who glimpsed Jacob described something unfinished limbs slightly too long, as if the proportions were still settling. He never came to town, but Sarah still did, and one day she brought a gift, a ring hand-carved from dark wood polished so smooth it almost shone. She asked the blacksmith to inlay it with silver, a delicate, perfect band. But she never said, for whom. The inscription on the ring is what still haunts me. To my life, from your birth. Not the sort of thing a mother writes to a son. It reads more like something whispered to a lover, or to a reflection. A gift not of affection but of ownership. Completion. The ring now sits in a display case at the county museum. No context, no explanation, just a plaque, recovered near the Elbridge homestead, 1890s. But most people miss the detail beneath the silver inlay. The wood is scored with thin, shallow grooves, marks worn in by skin and time. Jacob wore it always. That same year, the 1890 census came through the hollow. By then, the Elbridge property, once just a single cabin, had grown. The record lists Jacob Elbridge, age 21, as head of household. Occupation blank. Marital status blank. Beneath his name, another appears, S. Elbridge, female, age 52. No relationship given. Not mother, not wife, just present. That silence says more than any designation could. The census taker Milburn wrote in his own ledger that he was received coldly, never invited past the gate. He described the land as heavy, the structures connected in strange ways like organs stitched from separate bodies. 6 months later, Milburn was dead, his throat crushed in what was called a barn accident. But it's his final note that stays with me. A single sentence scribbled at the bottom of the page, like an afterthought. The woman's eyes, he had them too. What Sarah created wasn't a home. It was a vessel, a doubling. And what Jacob became was not a son, nor even a man, but a mirror. A mirror polished until it stopped reflecting and started remembering. If you raise a reflection, does it ever cast its own shadow? Or does it wait patient until the light hits just right? They called it the house with no rooms. Not quite true. The Elbridge homestead had rooms, dozens of them, but none that opened where they should. Doors led to dead ends. Hallways bent back on themselves. Whole wings without windows. Their walls lined with warped mirrors that swallowed reflection like mouths. I've seen the floor plans drawn by a surveyor in 1894. He abandoned the job halfway through. His notes dissolve into frantic lines and strange symbols. The last page ends with a single sentence, "I met myself." I should not have. By then, no one went near the ridge. Not even the trappers who once used the old trails. The land itself had begun to fold inward. Pines twisted toward some invisible center. Birds avoided the sky above it. Stand at the edge of those woods and you'd hear nothing. No wind, no insects, just stillness, like a breath held too long. It's said Jacob walked into town once during that time, barefoot, feet pale and cut. He spoke to no one, just stood in front of the general store for over an hour, staring at his reflection in the glass. Not into the store, into himself. He smelled of Sarah's perfume, not merely scented, but steeped in it. A sweetness that clung thick and suffocating. One woman fainted. Another swore she saw 2 sets of lips move when Jacob turned to leave his, and a faint second mouth just behind the glass. By then, Sarah Elbridge had vanished. No death record, no obituary, nothing buried. Just gone. Yet, Jacob began speaking of my beloved in the third person in ledgers, on tax forms, even in a note left at the church. She moves within the walls. The house remembers her touch. I tend her garden of silence. The Sheriff Henry Lyall visited after townsfolk signed a petition. He returned pale, refused to speak of it, and resigned shortly after. But in the margins of his final duty log, there's one line that has never left me. He calls her mother and wife and God. Since then, I've gathered sketches from kids who claim they've dreamed of the Elbridge house. Every drawing is the same, a black hallway lined with mirrors. And at the far end, a tall figure holding hands with its own reflection. The Elbridge home was never built for shelter. It was a shrine, a cocoon, a sacred womb designed not to house but to contain. If its walls seemed to turn inward, perhaps it was because they were never meant to let anything out. Not light, not sound, not even time. Sometimes I wonder, when you build a home around a ghost, does it ever stop growing? Or does it just wait, patient, for you to move in? The invitation arrived in June of 1897. One envelope, wax sealed. Not with a crest, but with the imprint of a human tooth. A molar, root intact. Too small for Jacob, too worn for a child. The paper smelled faintly of burnt sugar. And lie. It was addressed to Dr. Elijah Griggs, a physician known less for his medical skill than for his discretion. His notes, never published, never signed, survive only in a private family archive. Fragments, half-thoughts. They tell the story, though only in pieces. What follows is taken from those pages, and the few scraps of county record left before Dr. Griggs disappeared entirely. He arrived at the Elbridge homestead on a moonless night. The house did not greet him. Doors opened without hinges. A hallway breathed warm and damp, as though exhaling from somewhere beneath the floorboards. At the threshold, a mirror lay flat on the ground. He stepped over it. The entry room was filled with effigies, bone dolls meticulously carved, each one bearing Sarah Elbridge's unmistakable face. Rows of them knelt in postures of devotion, their thin bodies draped in threadbare lace. Some had tiny rings on their hands, rings shaped from curled bark and human hair. Griggs wrote, its eyes had been painted shut, but I could hear it whisper, in the parlor portraits, dozens. Sarah and Jacob again and again. Their images aged not with time, but with something like religious reverence. Jacob always younger, always kneeling, veiled in rose light. Sarah draped in bridal garments, a scarlet ring on her finger fire, curling in the background. One canvas was signed only. Two made one without sin or bone. But the most disturbing record comes at the end of his notes. A chapel, subterranean, walls of stone and clay, air thick with perfume, myrrh and rot. In its center, a glass coffin sealed with wax bound in red ribbons. Inside lay Sarah, perfectly preserved, not embalmed, preserved, her hair combed, her lips stained, her eyes open, a veil draped across her midsection, and tied to her wrist, Jacob's wooden ring engraved in blood and breath, forever my vow. The thread binding it was soaked in a resin, dark as wine, etched into the chapel wall. The bride returns when the sun is ready. Above it, a mural of two figures merged by fire. One ash white, one bone black. Spiraling into a sunless sky, Griggs fled before dawn, abandoning his bag, his horse. He reached town barefoot, silent, hands raw, eyes wild. He never practiced medicine again. Within a year, he was gone. His last written line, it was not a tomb, it was a cradle. To love a ghost is one thing, to wed it is another. And then a question if Sarah was both bride and mother. Then who or what was she preparing to return? Is that sun still rising? Or are we simply waiting in its shadow? The Elbridge home burned in the early hours of October 3rd, 1898. No lightning, no storm, just an orange glow seen by a traveling preacher, a pulsing lantern, deep in the belly of the woods. By morning nothing remained but a husk ash, melted glass and stone, so scorched it had fused into blackened teeth across the ridge. The county coroner, Dr. Paul Manes, recorded 3 bodies pulled from the ruins. Only one was officially identified. The rest, unclaimed. The first was Jacob Elbridge. Though just 25 by record, the corpse bore the posture of something much older, limbs arched back, spine fused. His skin was blackened in patches, not burned but calcified. Manis wrote that Jacob's mouth was open as if he had died mid-song. The second body was Sarah, unchanged from Dr. Griggs's account the year before. Her form had been sealed in a thick amber resin, not sap, but something rendered. Animal fat turpentine and powdered teeth boiled to a shine. Her dress was untouched, her lips still painted. One eye, slightly open, the wooden ring still bound to her wrist by a thread, dark with age. But it was the third body that ended the investigation and buried it for good. The coroner's original notes, now hidden in a private collection, describe a malformed child no more than 4 years old, 6 fingers on one hand, no eyes, a skull elongated like a gourd, its jaw, Jacob's jaw, far too large for its frame. The pelvis was fractured not by the fire, but before death. Bones fused in ways that should never have been possible. In the margin, Manes wrote only, "Incest is a sin." This is something worse. Rumors bloomed like rot that Jacob and Sarah had birthed a moonchild. That the fire was not an accident, but a ritual gone wrong. Some claimed the third body had bark instead of skin. Others whispered it spoke as it burned. A photograph was taken and vanished from the county archives in 1901. A local embalmer who had seen it later told his daughter. It looked like a reflection that didn't want to match. What disturbs me most is this early blueprints show the chapel lay directly beneath the nursery. A womb beneath a cradle. A child buried above its birth. The fire may have erased the Elbridge home, but not its inheritance. Near the ruins, surveyors found a mirror, perfectly intact, face down in the soil. When they turned it over, nothing reflected. Not the trees, not themselves. Only darkness, as if the mirror remembered something it refused to show. So I ask if Jacob was the father and Sarah the mother. Who or what was the fire trying to erase? Spring 1905. A boy appeared on the southern edge of Elk Hollow. No family, no shoes, no history. Only a name stitched into the lining of his coat. E. Jacobson. 7 years old. Quiet. Eyes too dark for daylight. He was taken in by Reverend Elijah Clean, a widower who believed in second chances. But the boy never slept in the rectory. Instead, he built a shelter outside the church, a lean-to of river stone and pine boughs. He called it the cradle. At first, the Reverend's journal entries were orderly deliberate. Then, the handwriting, fractured margin scribbles, cross-outs, ink-blotted prayers. The boy is strange, he wrote, but not cruel. He sings in Latin. I never taught him. Later, he carved a ring from a bone found in the garden. Wears it on a string, calls it a promise, and then he speaks with two voices. The first is a child's. The second is patient. One entry was just 6 words. He said I was his son. Locals claimed they heard strange humming in the churchyard after dark. Not hymns, not human. A mason, Olan Greer, swore he once saw the boy standing before the chapel door at midnight, unmoving, mouthing something over and over. When asked what it was, Greer wouldn't speak. He just held up 2 fingers and touched his throat. Visitors began noticing carvings in the church. 2 rings always interlocked, scratched into pews door frames, even communion cups. In a hymnal from 1906, someone found a child's drawing tucked between the psalms. A house with no roof. A woman with no face. A figure with 2 mouths, one open, one sewn shut. By 1907, Reverend Clean was speaking less, eating less, and writing not at all. His final entry was dated March 3rd. He stands at my bedside, says he dreamed of fire and bone and the river under the floor. He says, I must be ready for the bride returns when the sun is ready. Clean vanished weeks later. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Only a mirror propped against the altar reflecting the open doorway, where no one stood. E. Jacobson was never seen again. Years later, in a local antique shop, I found a child's bone ring tucked in a reliquary case, mislabeled as mourning jewelry. The vendor claimed it came from the old seminary grounds. Inside the ring, almost too faint to see, was a single word, Elbridge, and beneath it, reborn. We like to imagine evil as loud, violent, unmistakable. But what if it is quieter? What if it comes back to us not as a monster but as a child, with a familiar name and a voice not entirely his own? And when he speaks, are we even hearing him? I found the remains of Reverend Clean's cottage on the outskirts of Elk Hollow, overgrown, half swallowed by the land. A stone chimney stood like a headstone, its top blackened, as though it had burned from within. The rest was ash-brittle glass and floorboards so scorched they had sunk into the earth. The second was Sarah. Her story began as a small scratch, and then the darkness behind it began to reveal itself. Sarah had been severely punished by the caretaker, Mr. Hale, for a crime she swore she had never committed. But what was even stranger was that after that punishment, she disappeared from the dormitory for an entire day. When she returned, her dress was wrinkled, her left hand was bandaged from wrist to knuckle, and her eyes, those eyes, looked far away, as if they were watching something far away, outside the window, beyond the stone walls of the Elbridge house. A few weeks later, on a damp afternoon, she came to see me. Sarah did not beat around the bush. Her voice was low and urgent, as if she feared the walls had ears. She said she had seen Mrs. McCreary and Mr. Gray dragging something heavy, wrapped in a black tarp, across the backyard before dawn. Sarah even dared to say, and I have never heard anyone else dare, that there was a room that was not on any of the Elbridge house plans, and that she had heard a knocking, slow, steady, coming from inside. I advised her to leave, but she only smiled tiredly, as if she had long ago decided that she would stay, whatever the cost. The third was Thomas Lee, the only student I had ever seen crying in the library in the middle of the night. Thomas was an orphan living on a small scholarship, and the kind of person who avoided attention. But one night in January, I saw him standing in the middle of the main staircase, looking down into the darkness of the basement. As I approached, Thomas turned and whispered a single sentence. "That floor doesn't end." He explained, or rather in fragments, that he had been sent down to the basement by Mr. Gray to bring up a trunk of files. But as he descended, he found the stairs growing longer, as if he were entering the bowels of a pit with no end. Finally, Thomas gave up and turned back up. And from then on, he never set foot near those stairs again.